The city's elite were mixing, the dance floor was packed, strobe lights were cutting through the crowd, the drinks were flowing. And the energy was at an all-time high when Kirk Frost and young Jock entered the scene. It wasn't just a party, though. They had a serious agenda and their target, Lil Scrappy. A man whose magnetic presence could light up any room was the reason for the slow, icy stares, the hushed words, and the storm that was brewing. It was not just a heated exchange. It was a full-fledged face-off that had the entire club on edge. However, what pushed Kirk and Jock to confront Scrappy so boldly? And just how far did it go before security had to step in? The night had only just begun, but inside that Atlanta nightclub, the energy was already electric, the kind of night that people would want to avoid. If you had status, this was the place to be. The dance floor pulsed with life. Strobe lights flickered and sank with the pounding bass, giving glimpses of faces lost in the music at the bar. And groups huddled over cocktails, yelling to be heard over the deafening beat. Talk about weeks of booming music, flashing lights, and a crowd that kept growing wilder. The line outside stretched around the block, packed with the city's most connected and stylish faces. About celebration, but there was something brewing underneath the surface. Kirk Frost and young Jock were sitting in their private booth with their entourages buzzing around them. They looked the part, complete with designer clothes, pricey liquor, and the aura of success. But something was wrong. Kirk's smile didn't quite reach his eyes, and Jock's laughter felt forced and delayed. There was a tension between them that most people couldn't see or care about because they were too busy enjoying the benefits of being in the orbit of two well-known figures across the room. Lil Scrappy, another VIP booth, was the life of his own party where Kirk and Jockey were. Locked in, Scrappy was pure energy. His laughter cut through the music, his movements were effortless, and his charisma was undeniable. He wasn't just there. He owned the space. People gravitated toward him, glasses clinked, and someone stopped by every few minutes to pay their respects. Scrappy had always been the type of guy who could make an ordinary night into an unforgettable one, and tonight was no exception. However, beneath the surface, things were changing. A waitress bringing drinks hesitated, sensing the change, her eyes flickering between Kirk's clenched jaw and Jock's narrowed gaze before swiftly moving on. Meanwhile, at Scrappy's table, the vibe remained electric and unbothered as he moved toward the dance floor, stopping to greet a few familiar faces and raising his glass in silence. At first, there was a look here, a whispered exchange there. But as the minutes went by, it became evident that Kirk leaned in and spoke in a low but urgent tone. And Jock's expression darkened whatever they were talking about. Acknowledgement that if he felt the weight of their stares, he didn't show it. The Jock watched him and his jack tightened. He leaned closer to Kirk, saying, "You see what I'm seeing over the pounding bass?" Kirk didn't respond right away, and his eyes were fixed on Scrappy's every move. Eventually, he nodded, saying in a measured voice, "Yes, I see it." There was history here, one that most people in the club were unaware of. The three men had crossed paths for years, attending the same events and hanging out in the same circles. Their interaction appeared to be cordial enough, but behind the scenes, the DJ changed tracks, the dance floor erupted, lights flashed faster, bodies moved tighter. And the club's energy reached its peak before Kirk and Jock stood up. Scrappy's rise, unfiltered confidence, and growing influence had made him a favorite. To many, but not to everyone. It wasn't just about him. It was about what he represented, his unwavering confidence, his ability to draw attention, and the way he moved like nothing could touch him. For some, that statement wasn't welcome. Without saying a word, they started to push through the crowd and cut directly to Scrappy. Meanwhile, Scrappy was engrossed in the moment, nodding to fans calling his name, raising his glass and keeping the energy going. However, those around him noticed it coming, and the atmosphere changed. And then all of a sudden, everything changed. By the time Scrappy looked up, it was too late. Kirk had stopped a few feet away, so he tucked his pockets, and the music, the flashlights, the faraway laughter, and everything else faded. A heavy silence enveloped their space, thick with tension, and Scrappy lowered his drink a little. His usual grin dimmed, and his posture straightened as he assessed the situation. He asked in a casual but cautious tone, "What's going on, guys?" Behind him, his crew stirred, and a couple of them stood up, their eyes darting between Kirk and the jock. No one spoke, but even the people watching could sense the tension in the room. Kirk didn't respond immediately. Instead, he studied Scrappy, his expression unreadable, and then, finally, "You've been running your Kirk's mouth," said. Voice low, even stirred up drama, and Scrappy's grip tightened around his glass. He raised an eyebrow, but his usual confidence wavered. "I'm not sure what you mean, but something in his posture betrayed him." His eyes flicked toward his booth, where his crew was now fully alert. They whispered to each other, but no one moved. This was Scrappy's battle, and he knew it. "If you have anything to say," he continued, turning back to them, saying it, and closing the remaining distance. His demeanor was composed and controlled, but his eyes conveyed a different message. Jock said, "We have plenty to say." His voice was sharp enough to cut through the din, and if you're smart, you'll listen. Scrappy didn't flinch. On the contrary, his posture hardened. His free hand curled into a fist at his side, and he took a step forward, standing almost toe-to-toe with Jock. The crowd around them changed. Some stepped back while others leaned in, drawn in by the threat of an explosion. At that point, the nightclub wasn't about the music. Jack spoke first, saying, "You know what this is about?" pointing a finger at Scrappy. "You've been talking out of your long mouth, spreading lies. You think you can run?" Scrappy's crew was tense, some standing, some hovering near the booth, their eyes darting between the three men, their whispers quick and urgent. It wasn't about the drinks, it wasn't about the party, and the area where Kirk Frost, young Jock, Lil Scrappy stood had turned into a completely different battlefield. Scrappy tightened his chin and said, "If I have something to say, I'll say it." He shot back, "But don't come at me with weak accusations unless you have something solid." At that point, Kirk stepped forward, his expression icy cold. "We've got more than just words," Scrappy said, "and we've got receipts." With a quick swipe, he unlocked his phone and held up the screen, and the glare of the device reflected off Scrappy's face. He squinted to see the details, but he didn't need to see them because the weight of Kirk's moves said everything. His jaw tensed, so he said, "You're going to show me some out-of-context messages? That's your proof." He snorted and waved a dismissive hand, but his voice wasn't as steady as before. His bravado was still there, but his stance had changed slightly. "Lily, this is the kind of subtle shift that only occurs when someone begins to feel the walls closing in." He took another step and is now standing shoulder-to-shoulder with Kirk. "You've been playing both sides, saying one thing to us and another to everyone else." Then he leaned in. Scrappy's annoyance boiled over, so he planted his feet, squared his shoulders, and locked eyes with the two men. "You think you can come in here and press me?" he said, his voice cutting through the noise louder. "Now, who do you think you are?" he asked. Heads turned from nearby tables. Conversations hushed. The nightclub's pulse continued to thump. The bass continued to thump, and the lights flashed, but in this small area, all attention was on them. The words landed hard, and Scrappy took a slow, deep breath, his fists clenching at his sides, his shoulders stiff. "If you have something to say it now, because I'm done playing games behind him." Kirk didn't blink, and his voice was measured and controlled. But underneath, there was steel that was bigger than you think. He leaned in just a little. Jock smirked and shook his head, saying, "You've already said too much." He said, "We're just here to make sure you know we're not letting it slide." Suddenly, Kirk took a step forward, close enough for Scrappy to feel the heat of his breath. His voice dropped, almost lost beneath the music, but it was still sharp enough to cut through the tension. Kirk murmured, "Keep Keep talking and you'll see what happens next." Scrappy remained motionless and didn't blink his eyes. Asterisk pounded. But his voice was firm and he said, "You don't scare me." The energy in the room changed once more. And Kirk's eyes narrowed as Jock's fists tightened and his muscles coiled, ready for whatever was about to happen. The crowd was on the verge of exploding, but a firm hand cut through the moment and landed on Kirk's shoulder. "All right, that's enough," said a security guard in a big, calm, but authoritative voice. Kirk didn't move at first, his eyes remaining fixed on Scrappy. The security guard wasn't playing when he gestured toward their booths and said, I don't care who you are," saying, "Vo, like stone? This isn't the place for that." For a brief moment, it appeared as though Kirk and the Jock might push back. The air still heavy with the weight of everything unsaid, but Kirk slid his phone back into his pocket and said, "We'll settle this another time." Scrappy exhaled slowly, loosening his stance, but the fire in his eyes didn't go away. They walked back toward their VIP section, disappearing into the crowd. Scrappy didn't move immediately. His breath was still a little heavy, and his hands were still tingling from the rush. One of his crew members landed on his shoulder and he blinked, forcing himself to ease back into the moment. "You're good, Scrappy," he said, picking up his drink, taking a slow sip, and turning toward his booth. His voice was calm and steady, but there was a hint of tension underneath it. But as he sat down, that gut feeling wouldn't go away. The way Kirk and Juke had approached him and looked at him wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. As the night went on, the tension didn't go away. Instead, it thickened and settled into the air like smoke that wouldn't go away. Kirk and Juke were back in their booth, but the atmosphere had changed. Their drinks were still there, and they weren't just two men having a good time anymore. Instead, they were watching and waiting to see what would be their next move across the club. Scrappy tried to shake it off by leaning back in his booth, with a drink in hand and a smirk on his lips, but those who knew him best saw right through it. His crew stayed close. Their conversations were quiet, and every few minutes they cut toward Kirk and Jockey. The entire club fell apart like a storm, hanging just above it, waiting to break, and then the whisper began. In record time, people whispered about what they had seen, embellishing every detail like storytellers spinning a legend. One woman near the bar leaning close to her. Her voice was quiet but urgent, and I swear Kirk and Jockey were about to start it off. Meanwhile, a man at the other end of the club smirked as he told his version of events, saying that Scrappy stood them down like a champion and that they didn't want any. The rumors took over and the phones came out. A shaky video appeared on social media, showing only a few seconds of footage taken from across the room, with little else visible, just Kirk and Jockey standing in front of Scrappy, the weight of the moment heavy in the air. The club staff tried their best to keep the night going after the hashtag went viral within minutes. But they knew that this wasn't just another celebrity feud and that their club had just become the focus of a viral moment. Back in VIP, Kirk checked his phone, his jaw clenched as he scrolled through the barrage of comments. "They're talking like we're the bad guys," he muttered in a low-controlled but tight voice of frustration. "We started this, Doc." He looked at the screen and shook his head, saying, "It's just noise." But after a moment, "Perhaps it's time we set the Ask Scrappy's crew watch the same firestorm unfold on their screens across the club." One of his boys turned his phone toward him and grinned, saying, "You're a legend, man. They're calling you the king of the club." Scrappy gave a brief laugh, but there was no humor in it, his fingers drumming against his glass and his eyes flickering toward Kirk and Jock's booth. "Record straight." Kirk nodded, but his eyes didn't soften. He said, slipping his phone into his pocket, "We need to handle this." He finished this by taking a slow sip of his drink without looking away. They were sitting there plotting, and he put the glass down with a quiet clink. "Do you think this is over?" "No, they're just getting started." As the club wound down, the energy outside was just as intense as it had been inside. People were in the parking lot exchanging stories and speculating that what had begun as a confrontation had turned into a full-blown saga. This wasn't just a night out anymore. It was a moment, a story that had the entire city talking. Kirk and Jock had finally stood up, but they hadn't. Kirk looked toward the exit and said, "No hesitation, Jock, follow. No looking back, no words exchanged, just a silent promise that this wasn't the end." With his voice low, almost to himself, one of his boys leaned in, whispering, but Scrappy shook his head and kept his eyes fixed on the door. "This isn't over outside in the night air," he muttered. A crowd had gathered near the valet, and people were scrolling through their phones, arguing, and moving through them in silence. Their presence divided the crowd like a ripple in water, and they got into their cars and shut them quietly. The glow from their phones lit up the interior as they scrolled through the online storm. Some people were praising Scrappy, while others were calling for Kirk and Jockey to drop more receipts. Kirk's expression darkened, and he said, "You know what we need to do?" Nodded. He already knew that the club drama was just the real fight that was about to happen, and that's where we stand now. Tensions are boiling, and alliances are causing a storm to brew behind the scenes. Now, the real question is, what do you think happened in that club? Is Kirk and Jock's version of events true? Or is Scrappy just the latest victim of some power play going on behind the scenes? Tell us in the comments, and trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. Notifications, because this is still ongoing.